Cartoons are supposed to be fun. They're supposed to make us laugh, to entertain kids, or to bring a little bit of magic to the screen. But what happens when those same colorful drawings step too far? What happens when a cartoon pushes a boundary so hard that governments, studios, or even entire cultures decide the public should never see it again? The 1960s might sound like an innocent, flower power decade, but behind the scenes, animation was stirring up trouble. From Disney trying to bury its own mistakes to underground films that terrified the powerful, these weren't just harmless doodles. They were controversial, shocking, and sometimes dangerous. Today, we're diving into 12 examples of cartoons that were censored, hidden, or banned altogether. And the reasons will surprise you. Cold Black and the Seven Dwarfs, 1943, USA. Our story begins with a cartoon that was never meant to be hidden forever. In 1943, Warner Brothers released Cold Black and the Seven Dwarfs, a parody of Snow White. On the surface, it looked like harmless fun. It featured an all-black cast of characters in a lively, jazzy setting. In fact, the idea reportedly came from black performers who wanted a cartoon with characters that looked like them. But instead of celebrating African American culture, the result was painful. The characters were drawn with exaggerated, insulting stereotypes. Big lips, over-the-top mannerisms, and jokes that made fun of an entire race. Even though the creators claimed they weren't trying to be offensive, the cartoon came across as racist mockery. By the 1960s, the civil rights movement was changing the way people thought about representation. What was once shrugged off as just humor was now being recognized for what it really was: harmful. In 1968, Warner Brothers pulled Cold Black and the Seven Dwarfs and 10 other racially offensive cartoons from circulation. They became known as the Censored 11. To this day, you won't see this short playing on TV. It survives only in archives, sometimes with heavy warnings explaining just how offensive it is. And while it remains part of animation history, it's remembered more as an example of what not to do than as entertainment. But this was only the start. Engine Trouble, 1969, USA. By the late 1960s, Warner Brothers was winding down its golden age of cartoons. But one of its last shorts, Engine Trouble, managed to cause so much offense that it was essentially buried the moment it was released. The star of the cartoon was Cool Cat, a groovy character designed to fit the hippie era. In this short, he encountered Native American characters. The problem? Everything about them was played for laughs in the most disrespectful way. The very title itself, Engine Trouble, used a slur. The native characters were reduced to cliches, feather headdresses, broken speech, and exaggerated features. By this time, activists and audiences were no longer willing to ignore that kind of portrayal. What might have passed in the 1930s or 40s now looked ugly and mean-spirited. The studio must have realized they crossed a line, because the cartoon was immediately pulled after its premiere in 1969. Unlike some of the older shorts that were quietly retired later on, Engine Trouble never had a second chance. It was banned right away and remains unavailable to this day. A reminder that even big studios could still make mistakes in an era when people were demanding change. And if Warner Brothers was feeling the heat, Disney was about to get caught in an even bigger storm. Fantasia, 1940, USA. Disney's Fantasia is considered one of the studio's masterpieces. Released in 1940, it was a blend of animation and classical music, filled with unicorns, fairies, and breathtaking visuals. But hidden inside that beauty was something much darker. In the Pastoral Symphony segment, the film showed centaurs, half-human, half-horse beings living in a mythological world. Among them was a small black centaur named Sunflower. Her role? To serve the lighter-skinned centaurs. She polished their hooves, brought them flowers, and fussed over them like a servant. The problem was obvious. Sunflower was drawn with exaggerated features that echoed racist caricatures, and her entire existence in the film reinforced a hierarchy where she was subservient to others. By the 1960s, during the height of the civil rights movement, Disney realized how offensive this was. So when Fantasia was re-released in 1969, the studio quietly cut Sunflower out of the movie. No announcement, no press release, just gone. Today, you can only see her in rare old prints. The modern version of Fantasia has been edited so thoroughly that many viewers don't even know she existed. Disney censored itself, essentially erasing a mistake it no longer wanted the world to see. But as bad as that was, Disney had an even bigger scandal hiding in its vault. Song of the South, 1946, USA. Few films in history are as controversial as Disney's Song of the South. Released in 1946, it was a mix of live action and animation. The movie introduced the world to Uncle Remus, Brer Rabbit, and the song Zip-a-dee-doo-dah. On the surface, it seemed charming, but beneath that surface was a disturbing problem. The movie was set in the American South after the Civil War, but it painted an unrealistically cheerful picture of plantation life. The black characters were shown as content, even happy, with their place in this world. Critics argued that the film glossed over the brutal realities of slavery and racism. Uncle Remus, in particular, came across as a stereotype, the kindly storyteller who seemed to live only to entertain white children. Even when it was first released, people were angry. The NAACP criticized it, and over the years, its reputation only grew worse. By the 1980s, Disney had essentially locked the film away. Unlike most of their classics, Song of the South was never released on home video in the United States, and you won't find it on Disney Plus today. Disney knows the film is too toxic. It's been quietly buried, with the company even retheming its theme park ride, Splash Mountain, to remove any connection. In short, this is a film Disney would rather you forget ever existed. But not every controversial cartoon came from Disney or Warner Brothers. Some came from artists working completely outside the system, and one of them used the most famous mouse in the world, Mickey Mouse in Vietnam, 1969, USA. Imagine Mickey Mouse, the smiling, cheerful face of Disney, marching into the Vietnam War. That's exactly what happened in a 1-minute underground short made in 1969. The film, simply called Mickey Mouse in Vietnam, wasn't created by Disney at all. It was an unauthorized protest piece. In the short, Mickey sees a sign saying, "Join the army and see the world." He signs up, boards a ship, and in the very next scene, he's in the middle of Vietnam. Within seconds, he's shot and killed. His face turns from a smile to a frown as he falls dead. It was shocking, bold, and deeply political. By using a beloved children's character, the filmmakers forced viewers to confront the brutality of the war. If even Mickey couldn't survive, what chance did real soldiers have? Needless to say, Disney was furious. The company never approved the use of Mickey, and they reportedly tried to track down and destroy every copy. For decades, the film was nearly impossible to find. It wasn't until 2013 that a copy resurfaced online. This wasn't a government ban, but in many ways it was just as effective. Legal threats, corporate anger, and the underground nature of the film kept it hidden for more than 40 years. But Mickey wasn't the only cartoon caught in politics. On the other side of the Atlantic, an entire farm was stirring up trouble. Animal Farm, 1954, UK. Based on George Orwell's famous novel, Animal Farm was an animated allegory about animals overthrowing their farmer and running the farm themselves. At first, it seemed like a story of equality. But as time passed, the pigs in charge became tyrants, and the farm ended up no better than before. The book was a clear critique of the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin, and the film, released in 1954, doubled down on that message. In fact, it was partly funded by the CIA as Cold War propaganda. The ending was even altered to make it more hopeful about rebellion against dictators. Not surprisingly, the Soviet Union and its allies banned the movie outright. In countries behind the Iron Curtain, owning a copy of Animal Farm was illegal. The authorities feared people might see themselves in the story and get dangerous ideas about resisting the government. Smuggling the book or film into Eastern Europe became an underground act of defiance. Meanwhile, in the West, the film was promoted as a powerful lesson against communism. So depending on where you lived, Animal Farm was either celebrated or forbidden. Proof that cartoons, even with talking pigs and horses, can be more than entertainment, they can be weapons of ideology. And while politics drove that ban, music and pop culture would cause the next one. Yellow Submarine, 1968, UK. In the late 1960s, the Beatles were at the peak of their fame. Their music defined the decade, and in 1968, they starred in the psychedelic animated film Yellow Submarine. The movie was a colorful, surreal adventure. The Beatles traveled in a yellow submarine to save a magical land called Pepperland from the music-hating Blue Meanies. With its vibrant art and classic songs, it quickly became a cult favorite in the West. But not everyone was singing along. In Cuba, the government considered Beatles music dangerous. In the Soviet Union, Western rock was seen as corrupting youth. Across much of the communist world, Yellow Submarine was simply never shown. Even in parts of the United States, after John Lennon's infamous comment about the Beatles being more popular than Jesus, some radio stations refused to play their songs. So while the film was celebrated in London or New York, a teenager growing up in Moscow or Havana in 1968 probably never even heard of it. The government censorship was subtle, not an official ban so much as a refusal to allow distribution. The effect was the same. Millions of kids were cut off from a film that symbolized freedom and creativity. And censorship wasn't just about Western imports. In Eastern Europe, even homegrown animators found their work silenced. The Hand, 1965, Czechoslovakia. In Czechoslovakia, animator Jiří Trunka created a stop-motion masterpiece called The Hand. It told the story of a humble puppet artist who wanted nothing more than to sculpt clay pots and tend to his flowers. But then a giant living hand appeared, demanding that he sculpt a statue of the hand itself. No matter how hard he resisted, the hand intruded, forcing him to abandon his art and obey. In the end, the puppet dies, and the hand stages a fake funeral to honor him. The symbolism was clear. The hand represented government control, crushing individual creativity. It was a daring allegory in a communist country where censorship was real and constant. For a few years, the film was celebrated abroad and even shown domestically. But after the Prague Spring of 1968, a brief period of reform crushed by Soviet tanks, the government took a harder line. By 1969, the hand was banned completely. It wouldn't be seen again until after the fall of communism in 1989. This wasn't just censorship, it was fear. The authorities knew the film's message could inspire people to question the regime, so they silenced it. But the Soviets themselves went one step further, banning one of their own films outright. The Glass Harmonica, 1968, USSR. Of all the Soviet cartoons ever made, only one was officially banned by the government. The Glass Harmonica. This surreal, dreamlike short had no dialogue. Instead, it told its story through abstract imagery and music. A gentle musician played the glass harmonica, bringing beauty and color to a dull, gray world. But a faceless man in black, clearly representing oppressive authority, turned the townsfolk into obedient, lifeless figures. The film's message was unmistakable. Art could free people, but authoritarian power would always try to crush it. For Soviet censors, this hit too close to home. Completed in 1968, the film was shelved immediately. No screenings, no public release. For 2 decades, it remained locked away. Only in the late 1980s, during the reforms of Perestroika, was it finally shown to audiences. There's a deep irony here. A film about censorship was literally censored, and for an entire generation, it became a ghost story. A banned cartoon whispered about, but never seen. Meanwhile, across the world in China, a completely different kind of cartoon found itself silenced. Havoc in Heaven, 1961 to 1964, China. Havoc in Heaven was a beautiful Chinese animated film based on the classic novel Journey to the West. It told the story of Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, rebelling against the Jade Emperor in heaven. With vibrant colors and traditional Chinese opera music, it was a national achievement, completed in 2 parts by 1964. At first, it was celebrated as a triumph of Chinese animation, but then came the Cultural Revolution in 1966. Under Mao Zedong's rule, anything considered bourgeois or suspicious was attacked. Red Guards scoured art for hidden criticism of the state. And suddenly, the story of a monkey rebelling against heavenly authority seemed dangerous. Officials worried that audiences might interpret it as a metaphor for rebelling against Chairman Mao himself. Within a year, Havoc in Heaven was banned. The director was interrogated, the studio's work was halted, and the film was locked away. For over a decade, Chinese audiences couldn't see their own folk hero on screen. Only in 1978, after the Cultural Revolution ended, was the movie finally re-released. It's a reminder that even folklore could be seen as threatening if it suggested resistance to power. And if politics could silence cartoons, sexuality could do the same. That brings us to Japan. 1001 Nights, 1969. Japan. When people think of animation, they often think of children's films. But in the late 1960s, Japanese artist Osamu Tezuka shattered that expectation with 1001 Nights. This wasn't a kid's story. It was filled with erotic imagery, psychedelic visuals, and scenes of violence. Based loosely on the Arabian Nights tales, it followed Aladdin through a surreal world of love, magic, and danger. But instead of family-friendly adventures, audiences got nudity, suggestive encounters, and bizarre sequences that shocked censors. In Japan, the film was released with an adults-only rating, but when it was exported to the United States, nearly 30 minutes of footage had to be cut. Lesbian references, sexual humor, and violent imagery were removed just to avoid an X rating. Even then, many theaters refused to show it. Outside Japan, the film was practically invisible. It wasn't illegal everywhere, but it was suppressed by default. Too sexual for mainstream audiences, too strange for the adult market. And if 1001 Nights shocked people, its sequel went even further. Cleopatra, 1970, Japan. The second film in Tezuka's adult trilogy was Cleopatra, released in 1970. If the first film pushed boundaries, this one obliterated them. Mixing history with science fiction, it followed time travelers visiting ancient Egypt to uncover Cleopatra's secrets. What they found was a bizarre mix of nudity, sexual comedy, violence, and psychedelic imagery. There were scenes of Cleopatra seducing her way through power struggles, exaggerated executions, and even a strange gag involving a man's mind placed into a leopard trying to romance her. The film was so extreme that when it came to the United States, it was marketed under the sensational title Cleopatra, Queen of Sex. It was never even submitted for an official rating. Instead, it was treated like an underground X-rated film. Most theaters around the world refused to show it. Where it did play, it was often cut or censored. The combination of sex, violence, and animation was simply too much for audiences in 1970. In the end, the film disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Only decades later did anime fans rediscover it as a daring, if flawed, experiment. Conclusion. From the racist caricatures of the 1940s to the underground protests of the 1960s, from government bans to corporate vaults, these cartoons prove that animation has never been just child's play. Sometimes cartoons make us laugh, sometimes they inspire us, and sometimes they terrify those in power. Because behind every ban, every censorship, every vault door slammed shut, there's a truth. Cartoons reflect the world around them. And when that reflection is too raw, too offensive, or too dangerous, the response has always been the same: hide it. But as history shows, no matter how hard they try, the truth always finds its way back. Whether it's a Mickey Mouse protest film resurfacing online after 40 years, or a once banned Chinese masterpiece re-released after a revolution, the art refuses to stay buried. So the next time you watch a cartoon and think it's just harmless fun, remember, even animated worlds can spark real-world drama. And sometimes, those bright, colorful drawings tell stories far more powerful than anyone expected.